At our wedding, my husband said, "This dance is for the woman I've secretly loved for the past 12 years. Then he walked right past me and asked my sister to dance. Everyone clapped. Later I asked my dad one question and my husband choked while my sister collapsed. Before we continue, I just want to say thank you for taking the time to hear my story. If you're comfortable, let me know where you're listening from, and what time it is where you are. Now let me tell you my story. The grand ballroom of the Monarch Hotel was a sea of champagne gold and ivory white. A string quartet played softly in the corner, the notes of a Vivaldi piece I'd personally selected weaving through the polite, expensive murmur of the city's elite. Every flower, and there were thousands, peonies and gardenias scenting the air with the smell of old money and new beginnings, was perfect. Every crystal on the chandeliers, and there were hundreds, had been hand-polished. I checked these details not as a nervous bride but as a CEO. My wedding, like my business, was a project. And it was, I had to admit, a flawless execution. My name is Naomi King. Tonight at 42 years old, I had finally become Naomi Vance. I sat at the head table, the train of my custom-designed gown pulled around my chair like liquid pearl. The dress was heavy, beaded with thousands of tiny hand-sewn crystals. Its weight was a comfort, a tangible anchor in a moment that felt impossibly light. For the first time in my life, everything was perfectly, completely in its place. I had spent my entire life being the responsible one, the elder daughter, the rock of the King family. I had built a fortress of a life, brick by brick, deal by deal, and tonight I had finally let someone else inside. That someone was now standing across the room, laughing with the mayor, Jax Vance. My husband. At 40, Jax was golden. He was the man who could disarm a hostile zoning board with a single self-deprecating story, or charm a wary bank manager into extending a line of credit. He was charisma given form, a walking, breathing, billion-dollar smile. I was the architect of our family's construction empire. He was the salesman, and together we were, I believed, invincible. I watched him. He caught my eye from across the room and his smile, which was already bright, became incandescent. He raised his glass to me. I felt a warmth spread through my chest that had nothing to do with the vintage champagne. It was relief. At 42, a woman like me doesn't marry for butterflies. You marry for partnership. You marry for shared goals. You marry for the quiet, unshakable certainty that this person is your ally. I wasn't a dewy-eyed girl. I was a woman who had earned this happiness. I had waited. I had worked and I had chosen. And I had chosen well. My father, Solomon King, sat to my right. He was a man carved from granite. The patriarch who had built King construction and real estate from red clay and sheer willpower. He was quiet, watching the party with the same assessing gaze he used for a new blueprint. He rarely smiled, but tonight he had a full, rare, blinding smile. His approval was, and had always been, the sun I orbited. To my left was my sister, Amara, my maid of honor. At 36, Amara was the beauty, the fragile one, the artist. Where I was spreadsheets and steel, she was watercolors and whimsy. Her dress was a whisper of lavender silk, and she was vibrating with an energy I mistook for sisterly joy. She kept leaning over, squeezing my hand, her eyes bright. "You're so happy, Naomi," she'd whispered during the ceremony, dabbing at her own perfect tear-filled eyes. "You deserve this. We deserve this." I'd corrected her, squeezing her hand back. I was protective of Amara. I had always been. Our mother died when we were young, and I had slipped into the role of protector as easily as I had slipped into the role of heir. She was my shadow, my responsibility, and in many ways my heart. The quartet finished and my father's event coordinator signaled for the microphone. It was time for the speeches. The room quieted, a respectful hush falling over the city's most powerful people. My father stood up. He was not a tall man, but he commanded the space of one twice his size. He tapped the microphone, the sound echoing once. He didn't have notes. Solomon King never needed notes. Solomon King looked out over the crowd, his gaze sweeping the room. It was the same look he gave a new construction site, assessing the foundation, checking the load-bearing walls, missing nothing. The ballroom, full of governors, senators, and CEOs, went utterly silent. When my father prepared to speak, you listened. "There's a lot of important people here tonight," he began, his voice a low, gravelly rumble that needed no amplification, though the microphone carried it. "I see bankers who have doubted me, and I see architects who have fought me." A few nervous chuckles rippled through the room. I see the mayor, who I'm still arguing with over that new zoning permit. The mayor raised his glass in a gesture of good-natured surrender. But that's business, my father said, his tone shifting. He turned, his body angling away from the crowd, and looked directly at me. His eyes, usually as hard and dark as obsidian, softened. Tonight is not about business, it's about family. I felt my breath catch. My hand, the one with the new heavy platen band, rose to my chest. I built my empire from the red clay of this state, with my own 2 hands, he said, holding them up. They were scarred, hands that had known labor before they had known boardrooms. I built it to last. I built it on a simple principle. You use the best materials. You don't cut corners. You build on rock, not on sand. He paused, and his gaze found me. My Naomi, she's not just my daughter, she's my rock. She's the steel rebar in the foundation of everything I've built. When her mother passed, she stepped up. When the market crashed in '08, she didn't just stand by me. She stood in front of me. She fought with me. She worked 20-hour days. She has a mind for business. Yes, a mind sharper than mine. God help me. But more than that, she has a heart of iron. She is loyal. She is my heir, and I am prouder of her than of any skyscraper that bears my name. I was crying now. Silent, hot tears that I didn't bother to wipe away. This was more than a toast. This was a coronation. Then he turned to Jax. Jax stood up respectfully. He looked, I thought, like a man truly humbled. His eyes were on my father, and he was listening with a profound, almost reverent intensity. Jackson Vance, my father said. His voice was no longer soft. It was assessing again. You came to my company 12 years ago. You were hungry. I like hungry. But I've watched you. I've tested you. I've given you responsibility, and you haven't failed. You've proven yourself a good CO. My father paused, and the entire room held its breath. But I wasn't testing you for a job, son, Solomon said, a small, rare smile touching his lips. I was testing you for this. He gestured to me. My daughter, Naomi. She is my barometer for quality. In steel, in concrete, and in men. She chose you. She believes in you. And because my daughter trusts you, I trust you. He raised his glass. So welcome to the family, son. You are a king now, don't you ever forget what that means. The room exploded in applause. Jax was visibly moved, his eyes wet. He pulled me into his arms, and I buried my face in his tuxedo jacket, inhaling the scent of him, starch, gin, and a faint, clean note of soap. I will not let you down, sir, Jax said, his voice thick, addressing my father over my head. I know you won't, my father said, clamping a hand on Jax's shoulder. As I pulled back, I glanced at my sister. Amara was dabbing her eyes with a lavender-scented handkerchief, her face a perfect portrait of ecstatic emotional joy. She was looking at my father and then at Jax with an expression of pure unadulterated adoration. He's finally officially my brother, she whispered, throwing her arms around my neck. He is, I said, laughing through my tears. Everything was perfect. It was a foundation of stone, built to last. I had never felt safer in my entire life. The formal toasts gave way to the quiet, intimate ritual of dinner. The clink of silver on china, the murmur of 100 conversations, the band returning with a soft instrumental jazz. I sat at the head table, a queen surveying her realm, my husband on one side, my father on the other. My gaze drifted from my father to Jax, and then, instinctively, to the next table, where Amara sat, laughing at something one of Jax's groomsmen was saying. My heart felt full to bursting. All the people I loved, all in one place, all safe. I watched Jax as he spoke with my father, the two of them leaning in, not as boss and employee but as equals. As family. It had taken so long to get here. 12 years. I thought back to the day Jax had walked into King Construction. He wasn't the polished CEO then. He was 28, sharp as a tack, a diamond in the rough, with a resume full of ambition but not a lot of polish. Solomon, my father, had seen the drive. I had seen the intellect. He'd been hired as a junior project manager. That same month, 12 years ago, Amara had returned home. She was 24, and had just flamed out of a disastrous attempt to find herself as an artist in Paris. She'd come back broken, or so I'd thought. She was fragile, volatile, and deeply, deeply lost. She was my little sister, and I felt a crushing sense of responsibility for her pain. I, at 30, was already a vice president. I was all business, all focus. I took Amara under my wing. I tried to shield her from our father's disappointment and her own self-destruction. I remembered, so clearly those early days, I had just started, tentatively to date Jax. He was smart, he was funny, and he was the first man who wasn't intimidated by my title or my father's name. Our dates were often just late-night meetings at the office, going over blueprints and sharing a container of takeout. And Amara? Amara had been my shadow, my third wheel. I felt a pang of guilt. Even now, all these years later, I had been so busy, so driven that I'd often tried to solve two problems at once. Nomi, I don't want to go to this fundraiser. Amara would whine from the couch in my condo. You need to get out, I'd argue, signing off on a stack of invoices. Jax, you'll be there, won't you? Keep an eye on her for me. And he had. Jax in his infinite charming patience had been so good to her. I remembered one night. A few months into our relationship, the three of us were at dinner. I was stressed, talking through a complex zoning issue for a new high-rise. Amara was sighing, bored, pushing her food around her plate. I'd been bracing for one of her signature dramatic exits. But then Jax had turned his full 1000-watt charm on her. He'd cut me off mid-sentence about air rights and asked Amara about a gallery she'd mentioned. He'd argued with her about expressionism, made her laugh, treated her not as the fragile sister, but as a fascinating woman in her own right. I remembered sitting back watching them, and feeling a profound sense of gratitude. I thought, he's good. He's a good man. He's even good to my difficult sister. I'd seen it as a proof of his character, a testament to his kindness. I had been so blind. I had encouraged it. Jax, Amara is so lonely. Why don't you take her to that new exhibit opening? I'm stuck at the office. Jax, Amara needs a +1 for this society wedding. Can you please go? It would be a favor to me. I was so busy being the responsible one, the protector, the CEO in training, that I had been blind to the fire I was building. I had handed my sister, my beautiful broken vindictive sister, to the one man I was beginning to love. And they had apparently found a shared interest. 12 years, I murmured, the number suddenly feeling heavy. What was that, my love? Jax asked, turning back to me, his conversation with my father finished. He covered my hand with his. His skin was warm. Nothing, I smiled, pushing the strange heavy memory away. Just thinking about how long it took to get here. 12 years, he agreed, his eyes shining with a strange deep emotion. A long time. He kissed my hand. But we're here now. We are, I said, my heart settling. The past was the past. The future was now. Dinner was over. The plates were cleared. The champagne had been refilled. And the band, now a lively 8-piece funk ensemble, had started the first dance set. The energy in the room was electric. My father was even on the dance floor, moving stiffly but gamely with the mayor's wife. Jax and I had already had our first dance. It was At Last by Etta James. Classic, safe. It was the dance I had dreamed of, my head resting on his chest, his arms securely around my waist, the world just a warm, happy blur around us. I felt in that moment, utterly and completely safe. After the song he kissed me, a deep possessive kiss that made the crowd cheer. He was a performer, and he knew how to play to an audience. Now the party was in full swing. People were laughing, dancing. Jax, a little flushed from the champagne and the congratulations, was vibrating with a restless energy. He was never one to sit still for long. My turn, he'd said, when my best friend tried to pull me onto the dance floor. I have to steal my wife back. He led me through a fast, fun song, spinning me until I was dizzy and breathless, laughing like a girl. He was so alive. Then, as the song ended, he didn't lead me back to our table. He hopped up onto the low stage, grinning, and took the microphone from the startled bandleader. Speech! Speech! A few of his groomsmen, already drunk, yelled from the bar. The bandleader, a professional, quickly signaled for a drumroll and a spotlight. The bright white light hit Jax and the rest of the room fell into shadow. He was in his element. He was born for a spotlight. Thank you, he said, his voice booming through the speakers. He was a natural. What a night. What a party, what a bride. The crowd cheered. I stood at the edge of the dance floor smiling, my heart so full it ached. First, he said, I have to thank the man, Solomon King. He raised his glass to my father who had returned to his table. Sir, You have been my mentor, my boss, and my hero for 12 years. And tonight, you've become my father. I will not let you down. My father nodded, a gesture of solemn acceptance. And to my wife, Jax said, the word rolling off his tongue like he'd been saying it for years. He looked right at me and his eyes were intense. My queen, my partner, my Naomi. You are everything. You know my heart. You know my history. The crowd awed, but he said, his voice dropping, a mischievous grin playing on his lips. I have a confession to make. The room, in playful suspense. I know. Terrible timing, right? He joked. The crowd laughed. But there's another woman. A few more laughs, but this time they were a little more nervous. I laughed too, assuming this was a joke. Maybe about his mother or our golden retriever. Bessie. No. I'm serious, he said, his face becoming strangely, deeply sincere. The spotlight seemed to narrow, the room getting quieter. Naomi, you know I've been with the King family for 12 years. 12 long years. He said the number slowly, as if it were a magic incantation. And well, I want to do something special. I want to honor that. The band leader, confused, looked at Jax. Jax nodded to him, as if they had planned this. Hit it, he said. The band, after a fumbled second, started a new song. It wasn't a wedding song. It was a slow, smoky, almost painfully intimate ballad. A song by an indie artist. A song I vaguely recognized. It was a song I hated. It was Amara's favorite. She was always playing it in her apartment, talking about how it was her song, how it understood her. My smile faltered. My stomach gave a strange cold lurch. What a strange choice. Jax's voice boomed again, full of a thick, syrupy emotion. This next dance, this song, it's not for my bride. It is for the woman I've secretly truly loved. For the past 12 years. My brain scrambled, trying to make the pieces fit. Not for my bride. Secretly loved. 12 years. Her song. It was a joke. It had to be. A strange, elaborate, slightly off-key joke. My hand, as if of its own accord, rose to my heart. The gesture was a shield, an unconscious move to protect the part of me that was suddenly terribly cold. What is he doing? But my face. My face was a mask of wifely, bridal show smiles. I was Naomi King. I did not get flustered. I did not lose my composure. I smiled, my eyes searching his for the punchline. He was looking right at me. His face was unreadable. It wasn't the loving, open face of the man I had married 3 hours ago. It was a face I didn't recognize. It was triumphant. And he started to walk. He stepped off the stage, microphone in hand, his patent leather shoes clicking on the parquet dance floor. He was walking directly toward the head table. Directly toward me. A wave of relief washed over me, so strong my knees almost buckled. Oh. I see. I understood. Of course. This was theatrical. This was a Jax thing to do. He was saying he loved me secretly for 12 years. That he'd loved me before I was the boss's daughter, before we were Naomi and Jax. He'd loved me when I was just Naomi. He was telling our story in his own dramatic showman way. My smile became genuine. The warmth returned. I felt a little foolish for my moment of panic. He was walking toward me. The spotlight followed him. The entire room, all 300 guests, were silent, watching. I was the bride. He was the groom. He was walking toward me. My eyes instinctively flicked to my sister's table. Amara was watching the scene, her hands clasped under her chin. Her face was a perfect glowing picture of joy. She was beaming. She's so happy for me, I thought. She's so happy for us. I prepared to stand up. My hand, the one that had been at my heart, moved, starting to reach for him. I was ready to meet him, to be part of this story he was telling. My brain was so busy writing the romantic narrative, the only narrative that made sense, that it was failing to process the raw, contradictory data in front of me. The song. The song was wrong. It was a torch song, full of pain and longing and secrets, not a love song. His eyes, they weren't looking at me, they were looking past me. And his pace. He wasn't slowing down. He was 3 feet from my chair. I was half risen, my hand outstretched, my perfect bridal smile plastered on my face. And he didn't stop. He didn't slow. He didn't even look at me. This was the moment, the pivot point, the second my entire life, The foundation of rock I had built so carefully, turned to sand. He was so close I could smell the gin on his breath. I could see the tiny beads of sweat on his upper lip. And he walked on. The moments stretched into a horrifying, surreal eternity. 1 second he was my future. The next he was a stranger in a tuxedo, moving past me with the impersonal, unstoppable momentum of a freight train. His shoulder, clad in expensive, sharp-creased wool, brushed the delicate beaded lace on my own. The contact was a physical blow. It was an assault. A tiny, violent, and deeply personal rejection that sent a jolt of ice water through my veins. I flinched, not just my body but my very soul. He had touched me not with a caress but with a dismissal. He walked right past me. My hand, the one I had held out to him, was left hanging in the empty air. I slowly, mechanically pulled it back, as if it were a separate, stupid and embarrassing part of my body. I slowly, mechanically sat back down in my chair. The movement was small. I don't think anyone even saw it. But for me it was a collapse. I had been half standing to greet my husband, and I had sat back down, a widow. I felt nothing, and everything. My skin went cold. The blood drained from my face. I could feel the heat of a 1,000-watt spotlight of shame, even though the spotlight wasn't even on me anymore. It was following him. The sound in the room changed. The polite, expectant silence of the guests. It didn't just falter, it broke. The applause which had been building for the romantic moment died instantly. It was a sharp, awkward scattering of claps that just stopped. It was the sound of a tape machine slowing down, grinding to a halt. I heard it, a collective confused gasp. I heard a whisper from a table near me. What is he? I heard someone cough. I heard, very clearly, a glass being set down too hard, on a table. My eyes instinctively flicked to my father. He was no longer at his table. He was standing just off to the side watching the scene unfold. His face, which had been open and smiling, was now blank. It was the blankness I dreaded. It was the blankness that came before he fired an entire division, before he tore up a $10 million contract. It was not anger, it was not shock, it was the absolute terrifying stillness of a man processing a betrayal so deep, he had to shut down all emotion just to calculate the damage. He was not looking at me. He was looking at Jax. And Jax was still walking. He hadn't just walked past me. He was on a path, a straight, undeviating line. He was walking away from the head table. He was walking toward the next table. The table where my bridesmaids were sitting. The table where my brain, my smart, capable CEO brain, which had refused to compute the data, which had fought so hard to write a romantic story, it finally gave up. It stopped fighting, and it simply He was walking toward Amara. He didn't just walk to her table. He walked right up to her chair. Amara, my beautiful, fragile, broken bird sister. She was not standing. She was waiting. The whole time she had been waiting. She was looking up at him, and the expression on her face was not the one I had seen all night. The one of sisterly joy, of ecstatic happiness for me. This was something else. This was a look of pure, unadulterated, venomous triumph. Her face was a mask of joyful tears. Just as the plot had predicted, her eyes were wet. Her lower lip was trembling. She looked to the rest of the room like a woman overcome with emotion. But I saw it. I saw the look underneath. She had won. She had taken the one thing, the only thing that had ever been mine and mine alone, and she had proven she could have it. Jax stopped in front of her. He, the groom, in his spotlight. She, the sister, in his shadow. He held out his hand. It was a gesture from a fairy tale. A prince choosing his princess. And Amara, my sister, who I had protected, who I had sheltered, who I had loved. She placed her hand in his. It was not the fumbling, confused gesture of a woman surprised by the moment. Her hand met his with a practiced, familiar, and possessive ease. They had done this before. This was not a new dance. This was a very, very old one. The song, her song, swelled. The lyrics, which I had ignored, now hit me like a physical punch. They don't know about the secret. They don't know about the nights we stole. They don't know that I am yours, and you are mine, and that my home is not my home at all. 12 years. The words from Jax's speech echoed in my head. Secretly loved. 12 years. It wasn't a random number. It wasn't a bit of romantic hyperbole. It was a timeline. It was the entire time. The entire 12 years he had been at the company. The 12 years he had been dating me, engaged to me, living with me. The 12 years I had been protecting her, pushing her toward him, thinking I was helping. I had not been his partner. I had been his cover. I had not been his queen. I had been his bridge. A bridge to the king empire. A bridge to the king fortune. And a bridge to my sister. A wave of nausea so profound it made the room spin, washed over me. I gripped the edge of the table, the gaudy, extravagant floral centerpiece. In front of me suddenly smelled not of peonies but of rot. Jax pulled Amara from her chair. He pulled her onto the dance floor, and the spotlight which had briefly illuminated my shame, swung away, leaving me in the sudden, shocking and absolute darkness. It found them in the center of the floor, and bathed them in a brilliant, damning white light. I, Naomi King, the bride, the heir, the rock, I had just been publicly and spectacularly eclipsed. I was in darkness, but I could see them perfectly bathed in that single damning spotlight. They were the center of the universe. Jax, my husband, and Amara, my sister, and I, the bride, was just a shadow in the audience, watching their premiere. The silence in the room was a living thing. It was thick, heavy, and suffocating. You could hear the ice melting in 300 glasses. You could hear the collective, indrawn breath of the city's elite. What is he doing? I heard a woman whisper from a nearby table. Is that Amara? Her sister? Is this part of the social calculation was happening at the speed of light, in 300 different brains. The narrative was broken, and people were panicked. They needed a new one. And then, one person provided it. It was Beatrice Holloway, a society matron whose family had been in this city for a century. A woman whose entire life was built on papering over uncomfortable truths with polite fictions. She clapped. A single loud, definitive smack of her bejeweled hands. "Oh, how sweet," she boomed, her voice cutting through the silence like a foghorn. "He's dancing with his new sister. What a beautiful, beautiful gesture of family." It was a lie. A brilliant, necessary, social-saving lie. And the room lunged at it. A few hesitant claps followed hers, and then, like a wave, the applause exploded. It wasn't just applause, it was a roar of pure, unadulterated relief. They were clapping to cover the awkwardness. They were clapping to re-establish the narrative. They were clapping not for the dance, but for Beatrice, for giving them a version of events they could all live with. They were applauding the lie. And I, sitting in the dark, felt the applause like a physical assault. Every clap was a stone. Every cheer was a jeer. They were applauding my public execution. They were celebrating my replacement. They were agreeing, as a group, to look away, to pretend the thing that was happening right in front of them was not in fact happening. How lovely! So much love in that family. My heart just melts. The lies piled up, one on top of the other, building a new false foundation over the one that had just crumbled. I sat there frozen, my hands gripping the edge of the table. The ice that had flooded my veins was now a paralyzing Arctic cold. I couldn't move. I couldn't breathe. I was a statue of a bride, left at the altar while the entire town applauded the man who had left me there. I risked a glance at my father. He was no longer at his seat. He was standing near the massive, arched doorway, half hidden in the shadows. He was not looking at me. He was not looking at the dance floor. He was staring at the intricate gilded plasterwork on the ceiling. His arms were at his sides. His hands, the hands that had built an empire from red clay, were balled into fists so tight his knuckles were white. He was not clapping. The applause was a hurricane, and my father and I were in the eye of it, the only two people in the room who knew the truth, the only two people who were not, in that moment, lying. He saw it. He knew. In that instant, my paralysis broke. The shame that had frozen me, it didn't just thaw, it burned away. It was replaced by something else. Something cold, and clear, and pure. It was rage. I made myself watch. This was no longer a party. It was a deposition. I was not a jilted bride. I was an auditor, and I had just found a catastrophic irregularity. I needed to see the full extent of the fraud. So I watched, and I analyzed. I am a woman who builds skyscrapers. I know that a flawed foundation will, without fail, bring the entire structure down. And I was watching in real time the proof that my own foundation was fatally, irrevocably flawed. The data was clear. First, his hands. When Jax had danced with me, his hand had rested, formally, on the small of my back. It was a proper, respectful bridal touch. With Amara, his hand was not on her back. It was low. It was cupped, possessively on the curve of her hip. His thumb was stroking, in a slow, circular, familiar motion. This was not a new sister, this was his woman. Second, her posture. Amara was not dancing like a sister. She was not leaning in for a polite hug. She was melted against him. Her head was not on his shoulder. It was nestled in the curve of his neck. Her eyes closed, a look of pure ecstatic bliss on her face. Her hand was not on his shoulder, either. It was flat on his chest. Her fingers splayed over his heart. They were not dancing, they were clinging. Third, their bodies. They were pressed together from hip to thigh. There was no light between them. There was no polite fiction. They moved as one entity, swaying to the rhythm of her favorite song, a song about secrets and stolen nights. They were not just dancing, they were possessing each other in front of God, my father, and 300 of our closest friends. And then, the final damning piece of evidence. He whispered something in her ear. I saw his lips move against her hair. I saw her smile, a secret, tearful, glowing smile. She nodded, a tiny, almost imperceptible yes. This was not a surprise. This was a plan. The 12 years, the number echoed in my head, a tolling bell of my own stupidity. 12 years. The entire time, from the beginning, all the favors I had asked. Jax, can you take Amara to this opening? I'm buried in paperwork. Jax, you're so good with her, she's just so fragile. All the late nights he was at the office, all the business trips he'd taken, where Amara had coincidentally been visiting friends in the same city. I had not been a girlfriend, and then a fiancée. I had been a cover. I had been his alibi. I had been his path from junior project manager to COO, the fast track to the King Empire. I was not the prize, I was the price of admission. The fragile, artistic, unstable sister was the one he truly wanted, but the rock, the heir, the stable one was the one he needed to marry to get the kingdom. The nausea that rose in me was so profound, so violent, that I had to grip the table to stay upright. I had spent my entire life protecting Amara from her own fragility. And all this time she had been using that fragility as a weapon, as a shield to hide her true nature. She wasn't a broken bird. She was a viper. And I, Naomi King, the smartest woman in every room I'd ever entered. I had been the biggest fool of all. The song ended. It faded out on a long, mournful cello note. The applause, which had become scattered and confused again, finally died. The spell was broken. And as the music stopped, something inside me did too. The nausea vanished. The burning rage went cold. The shame, the humiliation, the heartbreak. It all just stopped. It was a feeling I recognized. It was the feeling I'd had in 2008, when the market crashed, and my father had locked himself in his office. It was the feeling I'd had when our biggest competitor had tried a hostile takeover. It was the click. The sound of the emotional, personal Naomi part of my brain shutting down, and the cold, calculating CEO part of my brain taking control. The woman who had walked down the aisle 3 hours ago, the one who believed in at last and forever, was gone. She was dead, a casualty of a war she hadn't even known she was fighting. In her place, Naomi King, acting CEO of King Construction and Real Estate, was back at her desk. My perspective shifted. This was no longer a personal betrayal. This was a corporate one. My new groom and my sister were not just lovers. They were co-conspirators. This was not a humiliation. It was a hostile takeover attempt. And they had just very, very stupidly revealed their hand before the ink was dry on the merger. My brain, now clear and cold as a winter morning, began to work. Objective, not to survive the night. Objective, damage control. Asset protection, neutralization of the threat. Threat assessment. 1T Jax, the primary agent. Guilty of fraud, conspiracy and, I supposed, on a personal level, being a bastard. 2. Amara, the co-conspirator, the inside man. She had access, proximity, and had used her fragile status as a perfect cover. My miscalculation. I had believed their motives were emotional. They are not. Their motives are financial. This wasn't about love. This was about money. My new objective: execute a controlled demolition. The lights in the ballroom came back up. The band, looking utterly baffled, struck up a cheerful generic jazz tune. The moment was over. And Jax and Amara were walking back. Not to Amara's table. Together, they were walking back to the head table. Back to me. The audacity of it was breathtaking. They were going to sit down. Jax was going to take his seat beside me. Amara was going to take her seat, my maid of honor, on his other side. They were going to pick up their champagne flutes and pretend that this was all normal. They were counting on me. They were counting on my breeding, on my politeness, on my unwillingness to make a scene. They believed I was too embarrassed, too broken to challenge their new bold narrative. They thought they had won. They thought the game was over. They had no idea that I was just about to make my first move. Jax sat down. He actually truly sat down in the chair next to mine, the one reserved for Groom. He had the audacity to smile at me, a smile that was part, "Wasn't that beautiful?" and part, "What are you going to do about it?" Amara, meanwhile, was dabbing at her perfect makeup-free looking tears, her shoulders heaving. She was performing Fragile for the entire table. "Nomi," she whispered, her voice thick. It was the most beautiful moment of my life. I'm just so full." "It was something," I said. My voice was calm. It was steady. It was not my voice. It was my mother's voice. It was my father's voice. It was the voice of the boardroom. It was so calm it startled them. Jax's smile faltered. Amara's fake sobs caught in her throat. "And now," the wedding coordinator chirped, her voice painfully bright, "it's time for the cake." A cheer went up. The staff, who had been hiding in the kitchen, wheeled out the cake. It was a 7-foot-tall architectural marvel, a white-on-white skyscraper of buttercream and sugar flowers, an edible monument to a lie. "Let's get the happy couple up here," the coordinator said, handing Jax the microphone. This was it, the moment, the knife. Jax stood, pulling me up with him. His hand on my waist felt like a spider. "Ready, my love?" he whispered, his breath hot on my ear. He was high on his own arrogance. He had done it. He had humiliated me, and the world had applauded. He had his arm around me, his new brother Amara on his other side. He had everything. He was about to hand the microphone back to the band leader, his speech done. "Wait," I said. My voice was not loud, but it cut through the din. I smiled. A bright, brilliant, 1,000-watt smile. I gently but firmly took the microphone from his hand. He let it go, a flicker of confusion in his eyes. This was not in his script. I turned to the crowd. "Thank you, everyone," I said, my voice booming, cheerful and strong. The room quieted again, curious. What a night. My goodness. So many surprises. The crowd laughed, a knowing, relieved laugh. The bride was okay. The bride was in on the joke. Beatrice Holloway's lie had become the truth. My new husband Jax, I continued, and my sister Amara, they just took my breath away. I paused, and looked at them both. What a beautiful dance. It just has me thinking. I turned, my back to the crowd, my body angled toward my family. It has me thinking about family, about loyalty, about business. The mood in the room changed again. The air chilled. "Nomi?" Jax said, his smile tight. "What are you doing? Let's cut the cake." "In a second," I said. I turned to my father. He was watching me, his face impassive, but his eyes were alive. He was waiting. "Dad," I said, and my voice was no longer that of a bride. It was his daughter, his heir. "I just have one quick business question. For our new CEO." I turned slowly to face my husband. The smile was gone from my face. My expression was now the one my junior executives dreaded, the no excuses look, the I already know the answer look. I looked at Jax, my husband. "Jax," I said. My voice was clear, my voice was amplified, my voice carried to every corner of the grand ballroom. He was no longer smiling. His face was a mask of confusion, and for the first time, a tiny flickering mouse of a thing, fear. "Nomi," he hissed. "Stop this. You're embarrassing yourself." "Am I said, my voice still bright. "I'm just so proud of all your hard work lately. I wanted to share it." I turned, just slightly, to Amara. She was looking at me with pure unadulterated annoyance. I was ruining her night. The night of her great triumph. "Jax," I continued, my voice sharp, "that new $30 million Sunrise Key development account you opened last week." The color drained from Jax's face. It didn't fade. It dropped. It was as if a plug had been pulled. One second he was a flushed, triumphant groom. The next, he was a pale, terrified-looking man in a too expensive tuxedo. This was not a wedding speech. This was an interrogation, publicly. I kept going, the words clear and precise. "The one you moved my personal shares into as collateral?" I now had his full attention, and Amara's, her annoyance had vanished. replaced by the same ashen terror. I had, of course, seen the transfer. I sign off on all major capital movements. I'd thought it was an aggressive, slightly reckless Jack's move. A way to impress me, to impress my father by fast-tracking a new luxury development. I'd assumed he'd put my shares up, the shares I brought to this marriage, separate from the company, as a show of good faith. I'd been touched by his confidence. What a fool. The Sunrise Key development wasn't real. It was a shell, a ghost company, a very, very large $30 million empty bucket. I'd had a cold feeling this morning, a knot in my stomach I'd dismissed as wedding day jitters. It wasn't. It was my internal CEO screaming at me. So 2 hours before I'd put on my dress, I'd made a call. I'd called my private banker in Switzerland, not my father's, mine. Mr. Allister, I have a strange request. That new Sunrise Key account, I need the full signature card. Fax it to my private line. Yes. Right now. The fax had come through, curling into the tray in my bridal suite, and I had looked at it. And now, I was looking at Jack's. I was just wondering, I said, savoring the pure unadulterated panic in his eyes. I turned back to my father. He knew what was coming. He was a builder. He knew a controlled demolition when he saw one. Dad, I said, my voice ringing with clarity, did you know that the only other co-signatory on that offshore account is Amara? The silence that followed was not silence. It was a void. It was the sound of 300 lives, 300 bank accounts, 300 reputations, all simultaneously re-evaluating their proximity to the King family. The revelation hung in the air, glittering and toxic. It wasn't just a 12-year affair. It was a $30 million conspiracy, a plan to defraud the company, to loot my personal portfolio, and to run. And then, the void collapsed. First, Jack's. He was holding a champagne flute, which he had just raised to his lips for a triumphant sip. He didn't just cough. He choked. It was a wet, violent gagging sound. He inhaled a mouthful of vintage Dom Perignon, and his body, in a moment of pure panicked guilt, rejected it. He sprayed the champagne out in a fine, expensive mist, all over the pristine 7-foot-tall wedding cake. He was on his knees, grabbing his throat, his face turning a truly astonishing shade of purple. He was making these awful gasping fish-on-a-dock sounds. He was not just surprised, he was caught. He was ruined. He was literally choking on his own lies. Second, Amara. My sister, my fragile, beautiful, broken sister. Her reaction was pure theater. It always was. Her hand flew to her mouth. Her eyes, wide with a terror that was almost believable, found mine. She saw no mercy there. So, she did the only thing she knew how to do. The move she had perfected her entire life. She became the victim. She stammered, her voice a reedy, pathetic squeak. He made me. I didn't know. He made me sign. Know me, please. And then, in a piece of performance art so grotesquely brilliant it almost deserved applause, her eyes rolled back into her head, and she collapsed. A dead weight, boneless. I am but a fragile flower, faint, right onto the dance floor. It was a masterful performance, but she had made a fatal error. A fragile flower might be a victim of an affair, but a co-signatory on a $30 million offshore fraud account. That's not a victim. That's a felon. Third, my father. I did not look at the two pathetic actors ruining the custom-designed dance floor. I looked at Solomon King. His face was stone. The blankness was gone. The fury was present. He had not built his empire by being a fool. He had just heard in one sentence that his new son-in-law was a thief, and his youngest daughter was his accomplice. He did not look at me. He did not look at Jax, who was now being pounded on the back by a groomsman. He did not look at Amara, who was unconscious on the floor. He looked as he had before at the back of the room. He found the man he was looking for. Marcus, his head of security, a mountain in a tuxedo. My father did not speak. He did not gesture. He simply nodded. One single downward nod. The message was clear. The threat has been identified. The asset is compromised. Clean it up. The chaos was immediate. Marcus and another security guard, a man I didn't recognize, began to move. They did not run. They walked. They moved with the calm, methodical, unstoppable purpose of men who are paid very well to make problems disappear. The sea of glittering guests parted for them as if they were Moses. The guests themselves were a single shrieking whispering organism. What did she say? Offshore? 30 million. Oh my God. Amara. Is she? The lies had evaporated. The truth, in all its ugly brutal financial criminal glory, was out. Jax had finally caught his breath. He was on his hands and knees, his tuxedo jacket covered in champagne and cake frosting, his face a mask of sweat and terror. He looked up at me. Know me, he rasped. Know me, please. It's a misunderstanding. I didn't answer him. I placed the microphone very gently on the cake table. My work was done. I looked down at my left hand. The 10-carat emerald-cut diamond was heavy on my finger. A $300,000 symbol of a fraudulent merger. I slowly, deliberately pulled the ring off. It was tight. My fingers were swollen. It resisted, just for a second. I gave it a hard, vicious twist. It slid off, leaving an pale, indented mark on my skin. I looked at Jax, who was now being helped to his feet by Marcus, his arm gripped in a way that was anything but helpful. I looked at the wedding cake, the monument to our lie, now spattered with his guilt. And I dropped at the ring. It didn't even make a sound. It just disappeared. Plunging thunk into the top tier of the expensive 7-foot-tall lie. Let them find it when they did the autopsy of this marriage. I leaned in, close to Jax. Marcus had him, but he couldn't move. I didn't yell. I didn't cry. I whispered, my voice, for his ears, and his ears only. I want an annulment, by Monday morning. His eyes widened in terror. If I don't have it, I continued, I am not going to a divorce lawyer. I am going to the press, and the SEC, and the IRS. I then glanced down at Amara, who was just beginning to stir as the second security guard reached her. And you're both fired. I turned. I gathered the heavy beaded, pearl-white train of my wedding dress. I held it in one hand. And I walked. I did not run. I did not look back. My spine was a steel rod, holding up a skyscraper of pride. I walked head held high, out of the ballroom. I walked past the 300 whispering guests. I walked past the ruins of my personal life. I walked past my father, who was still standing by the door. As I passed him, he didn't look at me. He looked straight ahead, but I heard his voice low and gravelly, a single word of command.
Cart.
I kept walking. I heard his footsteps, heavy and sure, falling into step right behind me. He was not following me. He was escorting me. The King family was leaving the building, and we were leaving it together. The end. Thank you for watching.